centuries aren't merely human aristocracies, but the heirs of an ancient demonic pact. Many see them as symbols of tradition, elegance, and historical continuity. But in certain esoteric circles, these surnames don't represent nobility, but a curse. Today, we're diving into one of the most forbidden topics in occultism. The 13 families that, according to ancient texts, are tied to demonic entities, not by belief, but by blood. The idea that certain families are not merely human rulers, but biological vessels of demonic forces, is not a modern conspiracy. It is a belief, born within the inner circles of the occult tradition. Since the Renaissance, magicians, mystics, and secret orders have explored a core premise, that blood can bind, not just spiritually, but metaphysically. That certain bloodlines carry keys, frequencies, that allow them to channel forces beyond the material plane. John Dee, the magician who advised Queen Elizabeth, claimed to speak with non-human intelligences through an angelic language he called Enochian. But many warned, these were not angels. They were deceivers, powerful entities who offered knowledge at a price. Not knowledge for all, but knowledge for a lineage. This is where the myth begins, not with demons appearing in smoke and fire, but with families chosen to carry their essence. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, grimoires, forbidden books of magic, emerged from the shadows of Europe. The grimoire of Pope Honorius describes rituals where the practitioner must sacrifice a goat and use its blood to sign a contract with infernal entities. The Grand Grimoire, equally feared, speaks of the Pacte de Sang, a blood pact that transfers power not just to the sorcerer, but to his descendants. The idea was simple. The blood carries the bond. In these texts, blood is not symbolic. It is a living seal, a biological anchor that links the body to the beyond. This belief gave rise to the notion that some families inherited power not from kings, but from demons. Later, occult systems deepened the myth. The Qliphoth, the dark mirror of the Kabbalistic tree of life, introduced a hierarchy of infernal spheres, each ruled by a demonic force. According to this vision, just as the divine world flows through holy bloodlines, so too does the infernal world require vessels, human conduits whose blood resonates with darkness. Cain, the first killer in the Bible, was often seen in occult circles not as a cursed soul, but as the first hybrid, born of human flesh, yet touched by a non-human force. From him, the idea of a tainted bloodline took shape, not a metaphor, but a literal descent from a pact sealed in primordial times. The Book of Enoch, banned from most religious canons, speaks of the Watchers, fallen angels who descended to earth and bred with human women. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were giants of unnatural strength and cruelty, evidence that human blood could be altered by contact with the divine or the damned. And although these beings were said to be wiped out by the flood, their blood may have survived, hidden, diluted, waiting. Over time, this gave rise to a disturbing theory, that some royal families, celebrated in public for their elegance and lineage, are in fact custodians of an ancient pact. That behind the crowns and ceremonies lies an older function, to host, maintain, and transmit the presence of non-human entities. These bloodlines wouldn't simply rule. They would serve a function, to keep the gateway open, to ensure that something older, darker, and far more intelligent remains tethered to our world. In the eyes of the occult, this is the true nature of certain dynasties. They are not symbols of nobility. They are living altars, and with this in mind, we now reveal the 13 families believed to be the earthly vessels of infernal power. Few names provoke as much suspicion and fascination as Rothschild. Founded by Mayer Amschel Rothschild in 18th century Frankfurt, the family's rise was meteoric. Through a tightly knit network of 5 sons, stationed in Europe's major capitals, London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and Frankfurt, they pioneered transnational banking, lending to monarchs and financing both sides of major wars, including the Napoleonic campaigns. Their influence became so vast that Nathan Rothschild once allegedly declared, "I care not what puppet is placed on the throne. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire." But in certain esoteric and conspiratorial circles, this power is interpreted not as the result of economic genius, but as evidence of a metaphysical pact. A bloodline alliance with Mammon, the demon of unending wealth and material obsession. In classic Christian demonology, Mammon is not merely greed. He is greed deified, a spirit of endless accumulation, of control through currency, of promises delivered in comfort and chains. As stated in the Gospel of Matthew, you cannot serve both God and Mammon. It's not a metaphor, it's a warning. In this lens, the Rothschild dynasty becomes the embodiment of the Mammon archetype, secretive, powerful, and globally embedded in the heart of the financial system. Their banking model, rooted in centralized lending, interest-bearing debt, and sovereign financing, is seen by occult interpreters as a systemic temple to Mammon. Occult theorists point to the year 1815, after the Battle of Waterloo, when Rothschild agents were the first to receive news of Napoleon's defeat. Legend says Nathan manipulated the stock market by briefly selling British consols, prompting panic, only to buy them all back at a fraction of the price, doubling his fortune overnight. To the esoteric mind, this was not merely cunning. It was ritualized predation, the visible hand of Mammon rewarding his acolyte. Even modern conspiracy theorists, such as Fritz Springmeier in Bloodlines of the Illuminati, frame the Rothschilds as one of the 13 ruling families, acting as economic high priests for a global occult order. Caricatures from the 19th century, originally intended as anti-Semitic propaganda, often depicted Rothschild patriarchs surrounded by coins, contracts, and demonic shadows, images which, though morally repugnant, are interpreted in occult symbolism as unintended truths hidden in plain sight. The family's historical secrecy and tight intermarriage, marrying within their own bloodline to preserve capital and influence, further feeds the mythos. In this interpretation, the Rothschilds did not merely serve Mammon. They became the vessel through which he exerts dominion, not through swords or armies, but through ledgers, loans, and invisible chains. If the Rothschilds represent the financial power behind the throne, the House of Windsor is the throne. From bankers to monarchs, the demonic web continues, and its next thread leads us straight to Belial, the demon of lawless dominion. The House of Windsor, formerly the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, rebranded itself in 1917 during World War I to obscure its Germanic roots amidst rising anti-German sentiment in Britain. But in esoteric interpretation, that change of name was not just political. It was ritualistic camouflage, a veiling of origin. In occult systems, names carry power, and changing them can signify the renewal of a pact or the concealment of a lineage's true function. The Windsors, seated atop the remains of a global empire, have long been the subject of whispered speculation. Their extensive genealogical connections to virtually every European royal house, their ceremonial practices steeped in ancient tradition, and their perceived emotional coldness and detachment from the public are seen by many as echoes of Belial, a spirit not of chaos or violence, but of sovereignty divorced from morality. In classical texts like the Book of Jubilees and the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, Belial is described as the worthless one, king over all the sons of pride. He tempts not through desire, but through absolute autonomy. He offers rule without judgment, power without conscience. This mirrors the archetype some see in the British monarchy, an institution that endures not by serving, but by being served. Its rituals, especially the coronation ceremony, are laden with esoteric symbols. The anointing oil, a rite of divine kingship tracing back to ancient Israel, the stone of scone or stone of destiny, and the hidden oath taken behind screens. All of it, in the occult reading, serves not as celebration, but as renewal, a reaffirmation of Belial's mandate. Rule as if you are above the laws of men and gods. Even the location is symbolic. In ceremonial magic, Belial rules the west, the direction of the setting sun, of endings, of empires in decline. And what is the British Empire, if not the most iconic sunset in modern history? Critics and conspiracy theorists often point to a pattern: scandals buried, allies protected, truths distorted beneath layers of protocol. The firm, as the royal family is known internally, is not a family in the emotional sense. It is a mechanism, cold, relentless, and self-sustaining. In this view, its allegiance is not to the British people or any divine creator, but to a principle: that power justifies itself. And that principle in demonology has a name. In whispered traditions, it's said that Belial requires no temple, no idol, no altar. His throne is wherever unchecked authority resides. And in the House of Windsor, crowned, veiled, and untouchable, his presence is not symbolized. It is enthroned. If Mammon governs through gold and Belial through authority, then Asmodeus rules through temptation, not only of flesh, but of knowledge, of immortality, of empire itself. And no family embodies this arcane seduction more than the Habsburgs. For nearly 7 centuries, the Habsburg dynasty dominated the political landscape of Europe. They reigned over Austria, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and beyond. But their legacy is not only measured in conquests and crowns, it is steeped in whispers of lust, madness, alchemy, and forbidden desire. To the esoteric mind, this dynasty did not merely rule, they transgressed. And the demon they are most often linked to is Asmodeus, the archdemon of lust, decadence, and forbidden knowledge. In the Book of Tobit, Asmodeus appears as a jealous spirit who murders each of a woman's husbands on her wedding night. In medieval demonology, he is described as the corrupter of kings, whispering sin into royal ears, urging incest, fornication, and the pursuit of carnal power. No demon is more associated with sexual perversion, bastard bloodlines, and secret pleasures, which is why, in esoteric theory, he fits the Habsburgs perfectly. The Habsburgs were infamous for their extreme inbreeding, often marrying nieces, uncles, and even first cousins. This led to genetic anomalies, most famously the Habsburg jaw, a severe prognathism that disfigured multiple generations. But for occult thinkers, this deformity is more than a consequence of genetics. It is a mark, a physical symbol of bloodline corruption, the signature of Asmodeus, stamped on the flesh. Their sexual history only deepens the connection. Charles V of Spain fathered multiple illegitimate children. Philip IV had over 30 mistresses and sired more than 40 bastards. Royal courts whispered of incestuous relations, hidden pregnancies, and unholy unions. By the 17th century, some clergymen referred to the Vienna court as a new Sodoma, and yet lust was only one face of Asmodeus. The other is knowledge. In Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire Infernal, 1818, Asmodeus is described with 3 heads: a man, a bull, and a ram, riding upon a dragon. This image is interpreted as symbolic of triadic dominion. The man represents Central Europe and the Holy Roman Empire. The bull, the Iberian Peninsula and its colonies in the New World. The ram, sacrificial and divine, represents the Habsburg aspiration to dominate Christendom itself. This thirst for absolute power led the dynasty beyond politics and into the forbidden arts. Emperor Rudolf II, one of the most eccentric monarchs of his time, made Prague the capital of European occultism. He surrounded himself with alchemists, astrologers, and sorcerers, including John Dee and Edward Kelly, who were said to perform demonic invocations and even attempt to create a homunculus, an artificial human. The Museum of Alchemy in Prague still displays sigils, rituals, and infernal seals believed to have been collected under Rudolf's patronage. In this world, the Habsburgs weren't just emperors. They were demonologists with a throne, searching not only for gold, but for eternal rule. Even religious artifacts were suspected tools. The Habsburgs were long believed to possess the Spear of Destiny, the weapon said to have pierced Christ's side, and perhaps even the Holy Grail itself. According to some legends, these were not relics of faith, but keys to immortality, tools in their Asmodean quest to escape death and solidify their bloodline's supremacy. In grimoires, Asmodeus is sometimes described as a builder of sacred structures, including part of Solomon's temple. In this parallel, the Habsburgs imagined themselves not as servants of God, but as divine architects, shaping an empire not with permission, but with arcane entitlement. If there is one name that defines omnipotent influence in modern America, it is Rockefeller. From oil tycoons to global policy architects, the Rockefeller dynasty ascended not through crowns, but through fuel, finance, and foundations. Yet for many, this ascent was not only industrial, it was ritualistic, a pact of empire cloaked in philanthropy. The demon most frequently associated with this lineage is Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies, one of the chief princes of hell. Originally derived from the Philistine deity Baal-Zebub, Beelzebub was later demonized in Christian texts as Satan's lieutenant. He governs gula, pestilence, decay, and corruption, but not through chaos or savagery. He devours slowly, subtly, systematically. This gluttony aligns eerily with how conspiracy law interprets the Rockefeller legacy. Their empire began with Standard Oil, which in its prime absorbed or annihilated nearly every competitor. To the esoteric mind, this was not business. It was consumption, a hunger with no end. Beelzebub's hunger, a force that swallows markets, governments, ideologies like flies around a corpse. But Beelzebub is more than gluttony. He is also the prince of idolatry. And the Rockefeller family, far from being mere capitalists, have long been accused of shaping ideologies, not just economies. Their foundations, including the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, have funded sweeping global agendas in healthcare, education, and governance, which critics interpret as veiled mechanisms of soft control, engineering belief systems, and spreading a secular faith centered on progress, consumption, and material salvation. In conspiratorial literature, these interventions are called cultic, not in the religious sense, but in the systemic shaping of a new moral order, one divorced from the sacred, centered instead on productivity, compliance, and wealth as virtue. More disturbingly, Beelzebub was considered in folklore to be a god of disease and filth. And it is here that darker claims arise. The Rockefeller involvement in controversial medical experiments, such as the infamous syphilis studies in Guatemala, or their early connections to eugenics movements in the United States, are viewed by some as evidence that disease itself had become a tool of dominion. To sow illness and then profit from the cure would be, in the language of the occult, a perverse form of sacrifice. Symbolically, the connection grows deeper. In ceremonial magic, Beelzebub governs the East, commanding 66 legions. The Rockefellers, based in New York on the eastern seaboard, rose to control Wall Street, banks, universities, and policy think tanks. Their influence spread across dozens of corporations, like legions under command. And as architects of the Federal Reserve, they became, quite literally, princes of the monetary order in the modern world. In some esoteric interpretations, Beelzebub is identical to Baal, the Canaanite rival of Yahweh, whose worship involved bull idols, fire, and blood. This imagery echoes through conspiracy tales surrounding Kikuit, the Rockefeller estate, where critics claim black masses and pagan rites were secretly held. Though no evidence confirms such rituals, the family's support of modern art rich in pagan symbolism, their promotion of transhumanist ideologies, and their funding of post-religious globalism have led many to frame them as priests of a new world, not of faith, but of form. Among ancient European dynasties, none is wrapped in mystery and myth quite like the Merovingians. They ruled over the Franks between the 5th and 8th centuries, but their legacy echoes far beyond history books. In esoteric lore, they are not simply remembered as kings, but as vessels of something older, darker, and perhaps not entirely human. The demon most often associated with their lineage is Lilith, the first woman, the first rebel, and, in occult tradition, the mother of demons. According to Jewish mysticism, Lilith was created before Eve. She refused to submit to Adam and fled into the night, embracing her own sovereignty and sexuality. Over time, she became the embodiment of dark feminine power, of rebellion against patriarchal divinity, of forbidden knowledge, infanticide, and seduction. She is said to prey on the children of others while empowering her own. Why link her to the Merovingians? First, the women of this dynasty were not ordinary queens. Figures like Fredegund and Brunhilde were infamous not for virtue, but for bloodshed. Fredegund was accused of poisonings, necromancy, and invoking spirits of the dead. Brunhilde, her rival, was said to have bargained with demonic forces to prolong her life and protect her throne. The Merovingian court was marked by fratricide, ritual murders, and mysterious deaths of heirs, an echo to some of Lilith's hunger for bloodlines. Second, the origin myth of the dynasty is chillingly aligned with Lilith's aquatic form. A legend claims that Merovech, the dynasty's founder, was born after his mother bathed in the sea and was impregnated by the Quinator, a sea beast of infernal nature. This myth mirrors the archetype of Lilith as a dark siren, a being from the depths who births hybrid offspring, half human, half other. Later, folkloric parallels reinforce this. The medieval legend of Melusine, a serpent-tailed waterwoman who married into noble lines and gave her blood to royal houses, was linked by some chroniclers to the Merovingians. In occult interpretation, Melusine is a mask for Lilith, seductive, powerful, and cursed. Occult writers like Gerard de Sede have claimed that Merovingian kings possessed psychic gifts, such as healing through touch and communion with nature spirits, traits interpreted not as miracles, but as taumaturgic talents passed through a non-human bloodline. In Kabbalistic mysticism, Lilith is the consort of Samael, and her offspring, the Lilim, are astral parasites that dwell in the cliphotic shadow of the moon, the dark side of divine creation. This connection becomes more than symbolic when one considers that Merovingian kings were seen not as political rulers, but as divine figures, living relics of a pagan and primordial power, one that Christianity sought to erase. Their fall came not by war, but by absorption. After centuries of rule, the last Merovingian king was dethroned by the Carolingians, Christianized nobles loyal to the Vatican. To the esoteric eye, this wasn't a coup. It was exorcism, the banishment of Lilith's line from the public world, forcing it into the shadows where it waits. The golden bee, their symbol, reinforces this reading. In ancient symbology, the bee is not just industrious. It is sacred to the goddess, associated with rebirth, the soul, and hidden knowledge. In pre-Christian cults, bees served as messengers between the living and the dead. Thus, the Merovingians are seen not just as royalty, but as occult royalty. The blood of Lilith flows through their veins, rebellious, mystical, seductive. Their fall was not an end, but an eclipse. It's no surprise that in modern mythologies, from the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail to the Da Vinci Code, the Merovingians reappear as the hidden bloodline, the true heirs of a double legacy, the sacred and the profane, the Christ and the demoness. The fall of the Romanovs wasn't just the end of a monarchy, it was, in some esoteric interpretations, a ritual sacrifice. And the demon linked to this event is Moloch, the ancient Canaanite deity associated with the sacrifice of children by fire. In occult symbolism, Moloch represents any power structure that demands innocent blood to maintain control. By this logic, the Romanov dynasty, which ruled Russia for centuries, fits the archetype disturbingly well. Throughout their reign, millions of young Russians were sent to die in wars: the Crimean War, the Russo-Japanese War, and World War I. From an esoteric perspective, these weren't just geopolitical conflicts. They were systemic offerings, a nation feeding its youth into the fire to sustain imperial power. In this framework, the Romanov Empire acted as a modern altar to Moloch. But the most disturbing alignment comes with the dynasty's end. On July 17, 1918, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children, including 13-year-old Alexei, were executed in a basement by Bolshevik guards. No trial, no mercy, just total erasure of a bloodline. Some occult theorists interpret this as a ritualistic execution. A poem found on the wall at the murder site, quoting Heinrich Heine, references the biblical banquet of Belshazzar. A king killed the same night, a mysterious inscription appears. To many, this was a message, a reference to divine judgment, deliberately placed as part of an occult ritual. It has also been suggested that members of the Bolshevik leadership were involved with esoteric societies, possibly tied to the Swedish order Dragon Rouge, which had known occult connections. And the execution date, mid-July, coincides closely with ancient fire festivals in Canaanite tradition, tied to offerings to Moloch. Even Rasputin, the mystic advisor to the imperial family, warned that if the Romanovs were killed by their own people, Russia itself would collapse. For some, that wasn't just prophecy. It was ritual context, the recognition that a sacrificial event was on the horizon, with catastrophic consequences. What followed was a civil war, mass famine, purges, millions dead. In the esoteric narrative, the Romanovs spent decades offering the lives of others to sustain their rule. But when the tides turned, and their role was no longer useful, Moloch consumed them too. The Medici family of Florence, bankers turned popes and dukes, were the architects of the Renaissance. Under their patronage, art, science, and philosophy flourished. They brought light to Europe after centuries of darkness, which is precisely why, in occult narratives, they are linked not to darkness per se, but to Lucifer, the light bringer. Before his fall, Lucifer was the brightest of angels. His rebellion turned him into a symbol of defiance, but also of intellect separated from divinity, knowledge that challenges divine order. The Medici family embodied this Luciferian impulse to elevate mankind through human reason, aesthetic beauty, and forbidden wisdom. Cosimo de' Medici funded Marsilio Ficino, who translated the Corpus Hermeticum, reviving Hermetic and Neoplatonic philosophies. These ideas, centered on natural magic and the divine mind, were embraced in Florence, but condemned by some clerics as diabolical. Within occult tradition, this paints the Medici not as Satanists in the vulgar sense, but as Luciferian patrons, those who carried the torch of enlightenment while defying religious orthodoxy. Even Pope Leo X, born Giovanni de' Medici, is surrounded by legends. He's often, perhaps falsely, quoted as saying, "How profitable this fable of Christ has been to us." Whether true or not, the line reflects how critics saw the Medici, using faith as a tool while privately aligned with secular power and arcane knowledge, a very Luciferian posture. Lucifer also represents pride and ambition, and here the Medici excelled. They arranged marriages that placed their daughters on European thrones, Catherine de' Medici in France being the most infamous. Her rule was marked by wars, poisonings, and political manipulation. She was nicknamed the Black Queen, and accused of witchcraft, necromancy, and consulting astrologers like Nostradamus. She reportedly owned a magic mirror, created by her personal magician, Cosimo Ruggieri, through which she practiced katoptromancy, divination by mirror. This symbol, the reflective surface revealing hidden truths, aligns with Lucifer's role as bringer of knowledge, even when it leads to ruin. The Medici family crest also invites occult interpretation, 6 red balls on a gold shield. Some see in them 6 planets orbiting the sun, a nod to celestial light. Others propose a cryptic 666, or the apples from the Garden of the Hesperides, guarded by a dragon, another Luciferian image of forbidden knowledge. Under Lorenzo the Magnificent, Florence became an Eden of free thought and sensual beauty. But for puritanical reformers like Savonarola, it was a city seduced by the devil. Savonarola was eventually burned alive in the Piazza della Signoria, right in front of the Medici Palace. To some, it was the symbolic battle between the fallen preacher and the Luciferian lords of Florence. In short, the Medici represent the Lucifer archetype in its purest Renaissance form, illuminators of mankind, but also pragmatic rulers, whose legacy straddles the line between divine inspiration and dangerous ambition. They brought light, yes, but at a cost. The House of Draculesti, rulers of Wallachia and originators of the infamous Vlad III, Dracula, is inseparable from the image of the dragon, and by occult association, Leviathan, the monstrous sea serpent of the abyss. Vlad II, father of Dracula, was initiated into the Order of the Dragon, a Christian military society. As part of this honor, he received a medallion bearing a winged dragon, which he adopted into his family crest. But among the local peasants, the symbol sparked fear. The dragon was not seen as a Christian emblem, but as a devilish beast. They began to call him Dracul, meaning the dragon, or the devil. His son, Vlad III, inherited the name and the symbolism. Dracula literally means son of Dracul, or son of the dragon. In demonological terms, this could easily be read as son of Leviathan. Leviathan, in biblical and occult lore, is the embodiment of primordial chaos, the reptilian force of envy, and the keeper of forbidden depths, a perfect archetype for the bloody legacy of the Draculesti. Vlad III's brutal reign, marked by mass impalements and rumored blood rituals, contributed to his transformation into a vampiric figure, an immortal predator in the eyes of folklore. In esoteric interpretations, vampires are often seen as offspring of Leviathan or agents of Lilith, functioning as spiritual predators that feed on life itself. The connection to water is also relevant. Leviathan is a demon of the sea, and legends claim that Vlad III cast the corpses of his victims into the Arges River, which allegedly changed course from the weight of the blood. In medieval grimoires, Leviathan is also associated with heresy, water symbolizing doctrine that slips through the fingers. Vlad's independent, often heretical rule echoed this spiritual rebellion. Post-Vlad, many Draculesti voivodes met violent or mysterious ends. Wallachia itself suffered alternating floods and droughts, interpreted by local lore as the land cursed by the dragon's legacy. A regional poem states, "Where Dracula fell, the earth wept blood, and the river carried it to the sea." An eerie tribute to the cosmic footprint of a damned lineage. Leviathan, as detailed in Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, is one of the 4 crown princes of hell, ruling over the element of water. His name is inscribed around the inverted pentagram in modern satanic iconography, an image often linked to Dracula via his association with bats and nocturnal beasts. Some theorists even propose that the Order of the Dragon was not merely a Christian institution, but a draconian cult in disguise, secretly venerating the biblical dragon, Satan or Leviathan, under the banner of defending Christendom. In more arcane genealogical theories, the Draculesti are linked to the descendants of Cain, passed down through the Cathars or the Templars, forming a spiritual bloodline rooted in Leviathanic chaos. Even in death, Vlad Dracula's remains were never conclusively found. The Orthodox Church long denied him a Christian burial. For many, this is symbolic. He didn't die as a man, because he wasn't one. In the mythic framework, the Draculesti stand as the reptilian heirs of Leviathan, a bloodline carved from chaos, terror, and silence. And like their demonic patron, they dwell in the collective depths, never fully dead, never entirely gone. Few families have left such an enduring stain on both ecclesiastical history and popular imagination as the Borgias. Originating in Valencia, but rising to power in Renaissance Italy, this dynasty placed 2 popes on the throne of St. Peter, Calixtus III, and the infamous Alexander VI, and produced figures of wealth, seduction, and blood-soaked ambition. Within the occult narrative, their demonic counterpart is Azazel. According to the Book of Enoch, Azazel was one of the chief watchers, the fallen angels who descended to earth and corrupted humanity. He is described as the one who taught men how to forge weapons, and women how to use cosmetics to seduce. In other words, Azazel armed the world with tools for war and lust. This dual legacy fits the Borgias with unsettling precision. Rodrigo Borgia, who became Pope Alexander VI, gained the papacy through bribery and intrigue. he flaunted his mistresses and acknowledged the children he had with them, most famously Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia. These offspring of the Pope became symbols of Renaissance decadence. Lucrezia, cast as the beautiful poisoner, Cesare, a ruthless military commander who aspired to carve out a kingdom in central Italy. Reports of the Banquet of the Chestnuts in 1501, allegedly hosted by Alexander VI inside the Vatican, described 50 courtesans crawling naked to collect chestnuts before engaging in orgiastic rites. Whether embellished or not, such accounts fed rumors that Borgia rule was guided not by Christ, but by demons. Azazel's teachings, warfare, ornamentation, forbidden knowledge, mirror the very tools the Borgias used to maintain power. Cesare, in particular, fits the mold of a disciple of Azazel, a man driven by conquest, uninhibited by morality. Machiavelli even used him as the blueprint for the prince, where political virtue meant cruelty, deception, and strength. In Jewish ritual, Azazel is also the recipient of the scapegoat during Yom Kippur, a goat symbolically loaded with the sins of the people and cast into the wilderness. This takes on strange resonance when considering the end of the Borgia era. Rodrigo and Cesare reportedly attempted to poison rival cardinals at a dinner to seize their wealth, but mistakenly drank from the poisoned cup themselves. Rodrigo died, and Cesare barely survived. To the occult imagination, this was Azazel claiming his due. The very man who turned the church into a den of lust and violence became the scapegoat of its corruption. Banished to the spiritual desert, his family name blackened for eternity. Lucrezia, meanwhile, became mythologized as a lethal beauty, a student of Azazel's arts. Though modern historians view her more sympathetically, the legend endures. The deadly ring of poison, the fatal allure, the cursed bloodline. In the eyes of esoteric historians, the Borgias were not just sinners. They were vessels of a greater infernal power, crowned with mitres, wielding swords, and seducing entire nations. A demonic dynasty seated not in hell, but in Rome. Their flame burned bright and foul. Among the quiet aristocrats of the New World, few names carry the weight of shadowed legacy like the Astors. Originally of German descent, the Astor family rose to prominence in 19th and early 20th century America through fur trading, opium deals, and real estate empires. But within esoteric theory, especially in the writings of Fritz Springmeier, who lists them among the 13 Illuminati bloodlines, the Astors are seen not merely as tycoons, but as veiled sorcerers of the elite. Their corresponding infernal patron is Astaroth. In demonology, Astaroth is a Grand Duke of Hell, depicted as a crowned angel riding a dragon and holding a serpent, symbols of dominion, forbidden knowledge, and seduction through counsel. His name derives from Astarte, the ancient Phoenician goddess of war and fertility, later demonized in medieval grimoires, such as the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum and the Ars Goetia. To the occult imagination, the Astors mirrored Astaroth's role, an elite lineage ruling not with thrones, but with deeds, not with swords, but with whispers. In Gilded Age America, they were known as the landlords of New York, with vast properties stretching across Manhattan. Mrs. Astor's infamous 400 defined the social upper crust. Behind closed doors, conspiracists alleged that these balls and soirees were hermetic rites in disguise, where masked dancers veiled symbolic rituals. One figure in particular draws attention: John Jacob Astor IV. Though publicly a financier, inventor, and science fiction author, he was allegedly involved in the spiritualist circles of the 19th century, attending seances and dabbling in esoteric philosophies. His novel, A Journey in Other Worlds, 1894, explores mystical life on Saturn and Jupiter, planets with deep occult resonance. To some, this wasn't fiction. It was initiation. His death aboard the Titanic in 1912 only deepened the myth. Astor IV was, according to some fringe theorists, opposed to the formation of the Federal Reserve. That same year, the Reserve was created. Theorists suggest his death wasn't a tragedy. It was a ritual sacrifice, a necessary offering to clear resistance before the birth of a new financial era. Astaroth, as the demon of prophecy and secrets of time, is believed to demand such exchanges. one soul for future control. In grimoires, Astaroth is said to grant knowledge of the past, present, and future, and to reconcile conflicts between spirits. Similarly, the Asters acted as diplomatic intermediaries. One married into Russian nobility, Prince Obolensky, another served as ambassador to Italy during WW2. Their influence stretched across continents, linking old world royalty with new world power. Just as Astaroth is said to mediate across infernal realms, they also financed powerful think tanks like the Council on Foreign Relations, interpreted by some as the brain trust of the hidden government. In this role, the Asters join a dark trinity with the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, mirroring the infernal triad of Lucifer, Beelzebub, and Astaroth. Though the family name has faded from mainstream awareness, their monuments remain: hotels, neighborhoods, cultural institutions. And for those who read between the lines, their legacy isn't just wealth. It's a lineage enthroned beneath the sigil of Astaroth, stewarding elite society not through elections or empires, but through bloodlines, blueprints, and secrets. Unlike the overt dynasties of global power, the Collins family operates in whispers. Allegedly, one of the most secretive yet influential bloodlines in the occult underground of America, the Collinses are named by theorists like Fritz Springmeier as more hidden and more powerful than even the Rockefellers. Not kings or tycoons, the Collins were old Puritan settlers in New England, with ties to high-level politics, religion, and, according to conspiracists, multi-generational witchcraft. Their infernal counterpart is Baal, the ancient Semitic god later demonized as a prince of hell, linked to fire rituals, idolatry, and fertility orgies. Baal represents false worship embedded within monotheistic societies, and the Collins, while appearing respectable, ministers, judges, or congressmen, are said to have secretly upheld rites of pagan darkness. In this narrative, their sabbats were held behind closed doors, masked gatherings, sacrificial offerings, and rites performed at equinoxes in windowless mansions built to channel ancient forces. Some testimonies from alleged survivors of MK-Ultra or trauma-based mind control claim the Collins were ritual leaders within underground cult networks, offering children or young blood in symbolic pacts. While unverifiable, these accounts shape the image of the Collins as priests of Baal in the modern world. Baal, often depicted with horns or a bull's head, demanded firstborn sacrifices and dominated with deception. Similarly, the Collins are linked in occult circles to programs of psychological control, generational trauma, and hidden authority. Even their tragedies, family suicides, mental illness, disappearances, are interpreted as the price paid to Baal, blood for influence. Some researchers claim the Collins were involved in the founding of Skull and Bones at Yale, injecting European esoteric traditions into American elite networks. Others point to their quiet presence in early spiritualist circles and Freemasonic orders. Even their rumored symbols, such as the winged sun or black star, align with Baal's ancient emblems of secret illumination. Whether folklore or fragmentary truth, the Collins are seen as the witch bloodline hidden in plain sight. They represent the occult embedded in Puritanism, the shadow beneath the cross, and the belief that Baal never left. He simply changed names and moved into modern America. In the shadowed halls of Vatican intrigue, the Orsini family stands among the most ancient and mysterious. Originating from Roman aristocracy, they trace their ancestry to Julius Caesar, and throughout the Renaissance, they were rivals to the Borgias and allies to the Medici popes. In theories about the black nobility, the idea that certain Italian noble families still control the Vatican and global systems of power, the Orsini are placed at the top, alongside the Aldobrandini and Farnese. But while their public face was pious, their alleged allegiance is said to lie with Baal or Belphegor, demons of deception, temptation, and secret dominion. Baal, the first demon listed in the Ars Goetia, appears with the head of a cat, a toad, or a crowned man, and grants invisibility and rule over legions. The Orsini, in this view, are the embodiment of hidden rule under divine disguise. Their name echoes Orso, bear in Italian, and Orcus, a Roman underworld god, adding layers of infernal symbolism. Belphegor, on the other hand, is a demon of inventions, wealth, and sloth, luring people with ease and luxury while corrupting from within. The palaces of the Roman elite, cloaked in religious art and solemn mass, were, according to 19th century anti-Masonic literature, fronts for black masses and heretical rites. Behind the marble and incense, some say, ancient pagan gods never truly left Rome. In Dante's Inferno, members of the Orsini family are condemned for simony, selling spiritual authority. In the occult reading, this wasn't metaphor. It was literal, a pact for power through corruption. Thus, the Orsini, as proxies for the entire black nobility, symbolize a lineage that never stopped worshipping the old gods, merely rebranded them beneath Christian robes. Whether through Baal's invisibility or Belphegor's seduction, these families are said to govern from the shadows, steering faith, politics, and economics not towards salvation, but towards something far older and far darker. So, were these families simply ambitious elites who shaped history through wealth, politics, and influence? Or were they something far darker, vessels for ancient powers, bound by blood oaths and occult pacts? The idea of demonic bloodlines may sound extreme, but throughout history, power has always carried whispers of the infernal. When monarchs claimed divine right, when bankers funded wars from behind velvet curtains, when popes broke their own sacred vows, people looked for explanations, and in the shadows, they found demons. Whether metaphor